Welcome to Cross Section, conversations at the intersection of faith, news, and culture. We are excited to be on YouTube. Please subscribe to the Evangelical Alliance YouTube channel to never miss an episode.
Well, hello and welcome back to Cross Section, Season 10, Episode 8, for those who like the count, because somebody tells me this to be true. And I am joined by my regulars. Danny, where are you coming to us from?
I am here at home in South London.
Oh, Danny, one of your many homes again, but your actual home this time.
My actual home.
Unlike Alicia, who I believe is one of her other London homes.
My friend's home in Essex, actually, not London. So,
Essex. It's all London to me, Alicia, but it's good to have you both here. So nobody's in the studio. We're all coming in remotely, and we're going to start off with just a little story that caught our eye this week. We will be looking in a little bit more detail. We're going to go into Adolescence, both the TV show and a number of other comments around that, including Gareth Southgate, about young men in our society, and riffing a little off that. That's probably the big talking point. And welfare reform. We'll wrap up with that because there's some big proposals there. But what else has caught your eye this week, Alicia?
Yeah, it's the story of Stephen Yaxi Lennon. Many of you won't know him by that name, but you'll definitely know him by Tommy Robinson. He's currently serving a 18-month sentence for contempt of court and breaching an injunction. And the story is simply this. He has applied to the High Court to kind of be released. He's been in a closed ward in HMP Woodhill for a long period of time. He's saying it's having a detrimental effect to his mental health. The story originally, he was in HMP Belmarsh, but was moved because there were rumours and threats to his personal safety. He's been moved to this prison, and similarly, there are other kind of prisoners who have threatened kind of physical harm to him. And so the prison have taken a decision to isolate him and put him in segregation. And my question is, how long can they keep doing that in an 18-month sentence? Is that compassionate? Is that merciful? Does he have a case that he needs space? What's the role of the prison in protecting his welfare? So I think that's one that's kind of compete in conversations. The High Court judge has currently said no, his safety is best placed in isolation and away from other prisoners. And I think this is a conversation that's going to come back to the fore because everything with Tommy Robinson tends to do that.
It does. All right, Danny, what story has caught your eye this week?
Well, the story that's interested me, and I know it's interested you, Peter, as well, is a man who had began the process of seeking to transition to have a sex change, to have physical surgery, and then has decided partway through that process to stop. He'd had some surgery, but what really caught my eye was that it was him becoming a Christian, which was so crucial in that decision. The BBC reported on this story, and in that they say he said he changed his mind about going ahead with any further surgeries after becoming a Christian. He said, that was my first time that I was ever honest with myself that I actually wasn't a woman. I was also giving up a future with a family and a kids. You are literally mutilating God's creation. It's so wrong. That's my view. And it's just interesting because stories around trans and gender identity are so high profile at the moment. And there are plenty of other stories about people detransitioning. But this story is really stark, it's really clear, it's really obviously linked to his Christian faith. And I think that's just something that's really interesting. And for us as Christians who comment on these stories, and for churches and people who pastorally engage with people in issues such as this, to do so in a pastoral and sensitive matter, but also not to lose sight of biblical truth and what we believe about God's creation and about human identity and human dignity.
I think it's a great story. I was tweeting about it partly because I think the coverage is noteworthy. So it's not only that he changed his views because of his Christian faith. I'm very glad he did, and I think that's great. The fact that the BBC in particular, and I'm happy to critique the BBC on occasion, but on this one, they have let this go through. He's very said, I've been down that path, because he was asked about being sympathetic to others. And he said, I've been down the path, but now I'm walking a new life with Jesus. I mean, there were a couple of very clear quotes about his Christian faith, and they came across very positively, and the story was framed in a way that allowed his faith to kind of shine through and speak very clearly about Jesus. And we know other people have had interviews where they've said things like that, but they've been ultimately cut and the story's been framed in a different way. So a rare shout out maybe to the BBC for allowing that one to go through and give a very clear faith articulation. My story, the one I was going to shout out, was a little bit of the space kind of landing. The astronauts who went up for 8 days and came back 9 months later. They got sort of stuck on the International Space Station. And it was the pictures, wonderful, the pod or the capsule coming down, the parachutes come out, and then this pod of dolphins circling them after they landed. But it was Sonny and Butch, they're called. It was the impact on their bodies. I think the commentary was a lot about Sonny Williams. She had this kind of flowing chestnut hair, and it came all white as she came out. And they both had to be helped out, quite frail, because cool as weightlessness might be, you don't use your muscles, and if you don't use your muscles, even to pump the blood around your heart against gravity, all the movement, you eat less, no sunlight. Apparently, the impact on the DNA of the skin is equivalent to smoking a pack of cigarettes a day. So while these incredible human bodies that we've been given are definitely wonderful for life here on Earth, and they may not be as well equipped for space or Mars, if that's where people want to go to next. So really intrigued about the impact on the body of life in space. And there's lots more we could say about that. In fact, I wrote an article for Being Human. You can check it out over there if you're interested on the Being Human website. So those are our big stories. One other, Alicia, I'm going to come to you. Just a reminder that the assisted suicide stuff is going through committee at the moment. I mean, we are not commenting in detail this week, although you will see us on social media. But there is a day of prayer, Tuesday the 25th of March, so coming up this week. Alicia, what's the kind of call to action for people around that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's turning our righteous anger about this piece of legislation as it moves through the committee stage into, first of all, a prayer. So in partnership with CARE, the Christian Institute, Affinity, and Christian Medical Fellowship, we're mobilizing our kind of networks and encouraging the UK church across all 4 nations to gather and to pray, whether it's on your own or in gathered prayer or online through church community or staff lunch if you're in a Christian ministry, just to intercede and pray around this bill, pray ultimately that it would fail. And so we have kind of put pointers on our website, and we can definitely put them in the show notes. And we've kind of been promoting it on social media. So it's a real rally cry to be praying that the will of the Lord will prevail. And then flowing out of that, we'll be sending more information about how you can engage your MP ahead of the 3rd reading vote in April.
Yeah, I said yesterday on social media that I really now just wanted to publicly say I just believe there's evil intent behind this bill. I don't think this is neutral anymore. I don't think you can even say it's an unfortunate. There is a malevolence. There is in some of the commentary this week about not allowing hospices to opt out, saying they should be defunded if they don't provide the service. I mean, there's a sinister element, and I just think we have to be absolutely clear, and that's one of the prophetic roles we have, is to call that out. So we're not commenting fully on the story. We will continue to, of course. But yeah, Tuesday 25th, lots of notes or information on the website if you want to learn a little bit more about how or what you could be praying into. But please do join us. This is a spiritual battle on this one. With that, we're going to go to our first kind of main thing that we are going to talk about, and that is adolescence. Not the 10 to 19-year-old period of your life, much as we all have a great deal of expertise, no doubt on that, but this is the show that almost everyone is talking about. This is all over the social media feeds. It's as close to a water cooler moment as we've had in a long time with all our various ways of getting shows. It's a Netflix show, I think I'm right in saying. It is a show that is based on an incident that happened loosely. It's shot in almost like real-time type idea. It's like a single shot, lots of different aspects to it. I will confess I have read lots about it, but not yet seen it, partly because I actually want to see it all and I didn't want to rush through an episode just for this. Linked with that, Gareth Southgate has given the Dimbleby lecture, I think it is, about the need for male role models, not gaming and not porn. And so a really interesting thing, again, for young men in that. And Gen Z Bible sales are through the roof. So we're going to wrap some of these stories together. But first up, Adolescence. What is it all about? Danny, I think you might have actually watched some of it.
I have watched it. I watched the final episode on the train yesterday. It's a remarkable programme. Partly the cinematography, the filming of it is intense, and I think it is deliberately so. Every episode is taken in a single take. One of the episodes revolves around the 13-year-old boy and a psychiatrist, and it's effectively just the two of them in conversation the whole time through. And I read this morning that a small part of that had to be improvised because they're on the final take, and there was a bit of improvisation going on because he yawned in the middle of the scene. I'll try and limit my spoilers, giving away too much, but it's the story of a stabbing. It starts with a morning raid in this boy's house, and he's dragged out of his house, and the police investigation, how the family are reacting. It's a really strong and emotional programme, and it raises really important questions about what's going on in schools, what's going on online, what's going on phones. In the final episode, there are a few lines from the parents when they're discussing this, and they're talking about what they did and what they could have done, and they talk about it, and they say, maybe I took my eye off the ball a bit, but he was in his room, weren't he? We thought he was safe, didn't we? Yeah. Didn't we think he was safe? What harm can he do in there? We thought we were doing the right thing. This idea that he was in his room, he was on his computer, we thought he was safe there. He's not outside getting into trouble, he's not outside in danger, but actually he's in his room. They thought he was safe there. What harm could he do? And it's raising this question of him being somewhat radicalised online, his views and his opinions. And it raises this ongoing question of access to technology, the impact that has on young people. Jonathan Haidt, who's written a book called The Anxious Generation, talks about this trend to making people safer. We take additional care and protection on how we protect people in the physical world, but we have paid far less attention to how safe and how much attention we give to people in the online world. And that impact, that we're not exposing people to risk in the real world, but we're exposing them to a lot of risk in the online world, is part of this trend and part of this situation that strands across both this programme and the other aspects we're talking about.
Alicia, I don't think you've seen it, but you've read, you were saying it's basically on all your feed as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think just linking back to what you were saying, or kind of the opening bridge point about Gareth Southgate's kind of remarks about the role of role models. If you listen closely, he also talks about the role of traditional families as well, playing a crucial role in kind of children's lives, but particularly men's life. And I think what's an incredible contrast with this kind of production is that the writers intentionally didn't use the stereotypical broken family household, drugs in the house, domestic violence in the house, and as that's the causal factor for why this young boy is engaged in violence of this kind. But he grew up in a seemingly loving household, parents who thought they were invested in his life, and I think it's an ongoing conversation across the country of how are families engaged in their children's life, and how are they resource skilled and equipped to understand, yes, they might be in the physical home, but there's a lot of the digital space for which they have access to. And I think there's great provoking of cultural conversations of what should we do differently? How do we relate? How do we connect? Because there is a growing trend, particularly amongst men, and it's been reported through different researchers, Centre for Social Justice. They recently published a report called The Lost Boys, that there's this increasing disengagement, that there's a level of society that isn't as well-intentioned in developing policy and reaching out to them. They have higher mental health distress and sickness. Level of unemployment amongst boys is higher compared to girls. And then when it comes to universities, they're lower performing than their female counterparts. And so there's this level of isolation amongst men, for which I think we really need to lean in, both as a church and as in society, to address some of the toxic behaviours that are equally rising in hidden places, both online and unfortunately in communities.
Yeah, so Sir Gareth Southgate was giving the Richard Dimbleby annual lecture. He talked about his penalty miss, the famous Euro 96 penalty miss. So missing that penalty was undoubtedly a watershed moment that made me stronger, a better man. He said it forced me to dig deep and revealed an inner belief and resilience I never knew existed. And he referred to the Lost Boys, the Centre for Social Justice report. Some of the things so he was very outspoken and very clear in his kind of critique of young men spending too much time gaming, gambling, and watching pornography. So again, not somebody coming from a faith perspective in this critique, and is raising these issues and putting them at the centre of the conversation. In the Lost Boys report, a couple of things it said: by the age of 14, almost half of firstborn children don't live with both natural parents. Boys are now more likely to own a smartphone than to live with their dad. And then it talks about the struggles with education, lack of male role models, and asking that question. I think the harder question is, so what do masculine virtues look like? What does it look like to model those well? How do we do that? But I know a number of people online were immediately commenting like there's just a wide open goal here for the church in terms of having a space where there are men, multi-generational spaces, forming communities where people can come into and see a different type of role model. Adolescence got picked up by the Prime Minister in PMQs. Gareth Southgate's speech has been widely covered in the media and got a lot of pickup. That's referenced back to the Lost Boys report that does a lot of the deeper work behind that. And it did seem like a number of these stories really coming together to kind of push the conversation up. So, Danny,
I think there's a challenge for society as a whole, but there's also a challenge for parents specifically. And I think sometimes it can be convenient to look at wider societal factors. Say it's the role of technology, it's the role of our culture, it's the role of schools, and there are undoubtedly factors that are important. And I think the importance of parents, the importance of a family is crucial. But actually, coming back to the Adolescence programme, as Alicia said, it was a fairly stable family. There's some reference to the father's upbringing and some of the challenges he'd had within that. And then I'm going to give you one more quote from that scene towards the end. They're talking about, could they have done more? And he said, should I have protected him? You couldn't. Could I have protected him? No. Should we have done more though? And there's a pregnant pause. And then the mother says, I think it would be good if we accepted that maybe we should have done. I think it would be okay for us to think that. And I think that's the challenge, like, for parents. I'm a parent of young children, to think, actually, how are we raising children in a way that they can think for themselves, they can act independently, but they are also able to engage with their family about issues that are challenging. There are male role models within and outside of the family that they can look up to. And I think it's important for parents to take that task really seriously. I don't think anyone really underestimates the challenge of parenting. I think most people recognise that it's a hard thing. I think they think it's a good thing, but it's a hard thing as well. But I think there's something in all this that actually we need to both look at kind of, okay, what policies do we need in society? But then also, what do we need to do in our families and in our communities to help with that? And I think we need to do both at the same time.
Yeah, it's another interesting conversation where, a lot of these are ideas or values that we as Christians would want to embrace, and people are coming at them from a different frame. And I find it, so we've got Labour government following on from a Conservative government before, looking at smartphone ban in schools. It's not just the phone, it's what they're accessing on that phone. And parents are saying, we can't do this on our own. I don't think, and I agree with you, Danny, we're not giving parents a free pass here, but any stretch, parents absolutely have to be the lead on this. But it is incredibly difficult without other forces coming to bear, and we're beginning to realise the impact of social media. This is obviously a drama written. It is based, I think, on some stories in real life, one in particular potentially, but so about the radicalisation of young people. But I'm certainly saying amongst friends, whether radicalisation, not to the extent of adolescence, but we are absolutely being shaped and cultivated. The other things that Southgate mentions, the gaming, the amount of time spent gaming. We're not saying gaming is bad per se. but I think we need to raise a significant flag around it. Gambling, deeply problematic. And again, you're seeing people absolutely shaped by that. Online pornography, these are significant, but there's also just the kind of toxic nature of some of the stuff on social media. And I certainly see it in my feed, and I'm aware, just really conscious now of how much you get shaped by that and the influence it has, the time you spend online. So this isn't simply about adolescence. It is this constant reminder of how much these small devices shape the time that we have. Alicia, you were coming in there, I think.
No, and I think what Danny was saying about the role of parents are important. But for some of our listeners, I'm a single woman. I have no children, but I have a lot of kind of children through church family and through extended family in my life. And I think as women in particular, we have a kind of a great opportunity to, one, build up men with our language. So kind of push against the cultural narrative that all men are this and they're all toxic and all of that. I think there's moments and opportunities to call that out where we see it, but I think the culture equally kind of throws out quite a lot of men that is unhelpful. And I think as women, we need to be clear with our language and be edifying and building up. But equally, if you're single and yet not to have a family, you have an important role both in church life and beyond it to invest in a younger generation, because isolation is a massive factor for the younger generation. They're well connected through apps, but yet their conversations with people older than them is something difficult. And I think we have to kind of cross thresholds to be curious, to learn, to share parts of our lives where appropriate, where we struggle and where we've seen God do miraculous things, and mutually encourage both young men and young women to be flourishing and healthy individuals.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I briefly mentioned at the top, I want to just come back to it for a second, the kind of Gen Z and Bible sales, because it'd be really easy to almost paint a picture of it's all negative and it's all problematic. We have been hearing for a while stories around people coming to faith across the generations, but particularly in the younger generation. We have heard from some of the student movements that are part of our membership that they are almost overwhelmed at the number of people coming to faith. The Times ran a piece, I think it was just at the weekend past, about Bible sales. They're up 87% in a 5-year period. The biggest move, according to the Bible Society, is in the Good News Youth Edition. I think it's an interactive Youth Edition Bible. So we are hearing these stories. So yeah, their sales have shifted massively. The Times reminding us that Gen Z are way less likely to be atheists. Only 13% of Gen Z are atheists, compared with 25% of Gen Xers, my generation, and way more open to being spiritual. 62% of Gen Z compared with 41% of Gen X. So we are seeing quite a significant shift. That doesn't mean everybody's become a Christian, but it does mean the spiritual openness is absolutely there. And the Bible says is a real tangible version of that. I mean, an 87% increase in 5 years is really significant. We're aware of other surveys and polls being done. Hopefully we'll be able to comment on them soon as more of this evidence comes out. But we have the stats and the stories to say something interesting is happening in this generation too. There is an undoubted openness to faith, and churches are seeing people coming in. And it is both the kind of Jordan Peterson, maybe young men who are educated and engaged, and it is also those who feel much more disenfranchised, maybe closer to the kind of Tony Robinson part of the system, who are also coming in. We're hearing these stories across the board, and it's not just young men, but that is exciting because it's been an area of the church where there's been probably the hardest to reach, and we've definitely seen a shift there. So we want to kind of put those stories together with that good news piece as well that is undoubtedly happening, and we'll undoubtedly comment more on it because I'm excited about it. With that, I'm going to wrap us up on Adolescence. You are listening to Cross Section, which you obviously no doubt know. You can get in touch with us. Oh, he looks at them every time going cross.section@eauk.org. I think I might have finally nailed that. You will also find at least Danny and myself on social media. So if you want to kind of comment more in real time on the story, you'll find us on. Well, Danny, you're right there.
Sorry, I thought I muted myself.
No, just to show this is a real live recording. Danny was coughing away there. You'll find Danny and I on social media, and you can, as I say, drop us an email if there's any particular story you want to see us covering, or you've got any feedback on the show. Do like and rate and do all those things. It would help put it out there. We're so thankful for you spending the time listening to us. We're going to the last story. This is probably the bigger political story this week, and this is around welfare reform. The government are proposing to cut $5 billion out of the welfare bill. in part because there's problems with welfare, but a significant part seems to be they're struggling to balance the books. We are waiting for a spring statement, it's called. It's not technically a budget, although it sounds very like one. And Rachel Reeves has put very tight financial rules in place that she has to meet. And there's a big problem, and it's relatively unusual. Labour government proposing this scale of a cut in the welfare bill, and they're getting a lot of pushback. One of the big areas of concern that I think links to our previous story is the number of young people who are out of work. So the numbers are up overall, but the biggest area of concern, I think, is amongst young people, 16 to 34-year-olds with mental health conditions, are 4.7 times more likely to be economically inactive than their cohort. And a lot of the stuff you'll see in the news is saying this is unusual to the UK, seems to be unique to us, in fact. No other country is experiencing that. And of course, once you're out of work for more than a year, you're 5 times, if it's less than a year, you're 5 times more likely to go back into work than otherwise. So basically, the longer you're out of work, the less likely you are ever to go back in. And I think that's one of the reasons this is so concerning, is so many young people with mental health conditions are out of work. And if that can persist for more than a year, their chances of getting back in statistically are incredibly low. That's enough of an intro for me. Who's coming in first on this story from our experts?
Alicia is gasping, so I'll jump in. Whether I'm an expert or not is dubious, particularly on this policy area. It is interesting because obviously there's been this increase in particularly around welfare payments for people out of work. And I think there's a principal question that people who have some level of disability shouldn't necessarily be discouraged from working. For some people with the most severe disabilities, that will be necessary, that they're not able to work. But I think what the good intent in this is to help people who do have some level of disability but are able to work, to be able to work better. So people with lower levels of disability will see the harshest cuts under these proposals. Those with the most severe won't see cuts. And I think that makes sense in principle, but actually for people who have been receiving those payments, this will be a big hit. It could be as much as £4,000 to £6,000 a year for some people, so that's significant. They're increasing the in-person assessments for these, what's called a personal independence payment. So I think you've got the theoretical value in some of these changes. You've got the real life impact that's going to be really hard for some people. But then you've also got the financial squeeze that Peter, you referenced, that actually the government are looking for money. They're looking to reduce money. They are not planning, I think, on increasing taxes in the spring statement that's coming next week, but they need to make sure that they've got the money to do what they want to do. They've pledged to increase defence spending. The economic growth hasn't delivered yet in the way that they might hope. And yeah, I think we'll come to it, but there's been a bit of pushback from the Labour benches on this, as you would expect.
Yeah, so we've got like 8.7 million people in the UK with a work-limiting health condition, and that's up 2.5 million, or 41% over the last decade. So we do have a real challenge, but to save 5 billion, you got to take 1 million people and cut their benefits by, you were saying, Danny, that kind of 4.5 to 6,000, so by roughly 5,000 each. I mean, that is not insignificant. And so Labour MPs are not happy about this, including Rachel Maskell, who you were interviewing in a bonus episode, Alicia, just last week. She's been fairly outspoken in her criticisms.
She certainly has, and she would be. She's someone that is very much, her core kind of focal pieces within Westminster is about the vulnerable, the marginalised and inequality, and a reform or a cut or a change of this size impacts all three of those categories. So I think the politics of this is going to be really difficult for new Labour intake to kind of engage with. Would they expect a Labour government to install a measure like this? No, but they're very early on in their parliamentary kind of time. And so is it time for a rebellion? possibly not. I think Clive Lewis was the only one that kind of came out in response to the minister's statement that was ready to say on record and within the chamber that this isn't good enough and I'm deeply concerned. And the journalist is challenging him, how do you feel if you're going to lose the whip because there's been a precedent before? And he's like, I don't want to, but I'm prepared to, because I'm prepared to speak out upon this. So it's deeply impacting. I think going back to the generation 18 to 24 and worklessness and that piece, I think what I'm reflecting on is the rise in the number and proportion of young people that are not in a level of employment or in training is actually a reflection on poor education policy, the equipping and resourcing of that generation to be ready for the workplace or their future if they're not going to kind of university. And so education and welfare is a conversation that needs to happen simultaneously. And I don't think the policy there is coherent in that sense. So there's going to be ongoing conversations about that. But then equally with the welfare reforms, linking back to the earlier conversation of assisted suicide, Paralympian medalist Baroness Tanni Gray-Thompson spoke in the Times and kind of outwardly said that these reforms leave people with disability likely to choose to end their life through an assisted dying law because they're not getting the welfare support that they so desperately need. So it's a very, very difficult time for kind of both politicians, but the state of our public services, that so many people are dependent, and it doesn't look like the state is able to kind of meet the needs. So it's a very challenging and difficult time at this moment.
Yeah, I was listening to Ed Balls and George Osborne. They have a podcast on a little bit about both their efforts in this area, and it's a constant challenge to government. Though I think everybody's seeming to say they want to protect the most vulnerable, but a lot of these assessments are incredibly onerous. And I mean, I remember as a young lawyer being involved in appeals around them because some of the decisions were frankly just daft what they came out with, because they have a very set of tests and mechanisms, and people who clearly can't work don't always meet that test. And yet you have this significant growth in the number of people, and it's out of kilter with any other nation. Why do we not have the same levels of resilience? Why are young people in particular, that's the biggest group where we've seen the growth, not getting back into the workplace? Back to your education point, but also something around resilience. And then talking to church leaders who are also saying they're spending significant amounts of times, particularly with young people and with more complex set of needs. Part of that's to do with family breakdown, part of that's to do with mental health issues, part of that's to do with a whole series of things coming together. And then the level of time it takes in pastoring around that is just incredibly draining. It's not a criticism from them, they're just acknowledging that there's often more complex needs when we're discipling and pastoring people in this moment. Danny, unless you had some burning issue to come in on, we're going to wrap up there. We've gone, because our time is gone. Hopefully you find that helpful as we've wrestled with some of the big issues. As Alicia said, so many of these things are interconnected. You can see straight away where welfare reform starts to get tagged in with assisted suicide, one of the other big issues the government is facing right now. And I am really curious as to how this government's going to navigate if it takes on another battle in this moment, how that will all unfold. We will obviously keep you updated, as we've said, where the assisted suicide story goes. Please join us this Tuesday praying into that and into that space. And we will see you next week when who knows what we'll be discussing and what will have topped the story pile and what will have caught our eye next week. But thanks for joining us and be blessed.
Hi, Alicia here. Thank you for checking out this episode. If you like it, please make sure to subscribe or share with a friend and leave a review. Till the next episode, take care and God bless.